Welcome, dear listener. As you settle in and let the day drift away, allow your mind to grow quiet and your body to grow heavy with rest. Tonight we will wander back in time to a place of gentle hills and soft evening air. Let this story guide you towards sleep, as we drift together into the life of a man whose name would echo across centuries. In the gentle hills of Tuscany, where olive groves shimmer silver in the afternoon light, and cypress trees stand like dark sentinels against the sky, there lived a young notary named Ser Piero da Vinci. The year was 1452, and the world was slowly awakening from the long sleep of the Middle Ages, stirring towards something new and beautiful that history would later call the Renaissance. Ser Piero was a man of modest ambition, content with his ledgers and legal documents, but he carried within him the seeds of something extraordinary that would bloom in the most unexpected way. On a warm April evening, as the bells of Vinci chimed softly across the valley, a child was born who would change the world forever. His name was Leonardo, and though he entered life as an illegitimate son in a small Italian town, he carried within his tiny hands the power to unlock mysteries that had puzzled humanity for centuries. The midwife who delivered him could not have imagined that she was welcoming into the world a mind that would soar higher than the birds he would later study, dive deeper than the rivers he would redirect, and see further into the future than any prophet. Leonardo's earliest memories were painted in the warm golden light of the Tuscan countryside. His grandfather Antonio would carry him through the vineyards, pointing to the way the vines twisted around their supports, how water flowed down the hillsides after rain, and why certain flowers turned to follow the sun across the sky. The old man's weathered hands would trace patterns in the dirt, showing the boy how everything in nature followed invisible laws, beautiful mathematics that governed the flight of birds and the growth of trees. These quiet lessons, given without books or formal instruction, planted the first seeds of Leonardo's lifelong fascination with understanding how things worked. As a child, Leonardo possessed an insatiable curiosity that seemed to glow from within him like a warm lantern. While other children played with wooden toys, he would spend hours watching ants build their colonies, studying the way they moved in perfect coordination, each knowing its role without anyone giving commands. He would lie on his back in meadows, watching clouds form and dissolve, trying to understand what force shaped them into castles and dragons and sailing ships. His young mind was already beginning to see the connections between all things, the hidden patterns that wove through everything from the smallest flower to the grandest mountain. The household where Leonardo grew up was filled with the gentle rhythms of rural Italian life. His stepmother Albiera, though she had no children of her own, embraced this curious boy with genuine warmth. She would find him at dawn, already awake and sketching by candlelight, his small fingers gripping charcoal as he tried to capture the way morning mist clung to the valley floor. She learned not to disturb him during these quiet moments of intense concentration, understanding somehow that what he was doing was important, even if she couldn't quite comprehend the depth of his vision. Ser Piero watched his son with a mixture of pride and bewilderment. The boy showed no interest in following the family tradition of law and notary work. Instead, he seemed drawn to mysteries that had no practical application, at least none that a practical man like Ser Piero could understand. Leonardo would disappear for hours, returning with his clothes muddy and his hands stained with clay, excitedly describing underground caves he had discovered, or unusual rock formations that told stories of ancient seas. The boy spoke of these things with such passion and precision that even his skeptical father began to sense that Leonardo possessed a gift that transcended ordinary understanding. The turning point in Leonardo's young life came when he was about 10 years old, during one of those magical Tuscan summers when the days seemed to stretch forever, and every evening painted the sky in shades of rose and gold. He had been exploring along the Arno River, which wound its way through the valley like a silver ribbon, when he came upon a group of men working on a watermill. The great wooden wheel turned slowly in the current, lifting buckets of water to irrigate the nearby fields. Leonardo stood transfixed, watching the elegant mechanical dance of wheel and water, gear and lever. For hours he studied the mill, asking the workers endless questions about how it functioned, why the wheel turned at just that speed, how the gears multiplied the force of the flowing water. The millers, amused by this intense young boy who spoke with such seriousness about their everyday work, patiently explained the principles they understood through experience rather than theory. They showed him how the angle of the paddle blades affected the wheel's efficiency, how the placement of the gears determined the speed of the grinding stones, how every element had to work in perfect harmony or the whole system would fail. This encounter with the watermill awakened something profound in Leonardo's mind. He began to see that all of nature operated according to similar principles of mechanical perfection. The human body, he realized, was like an incredibly complex mill, with the heart as its central wheel, pumping the vital fluid of blood through an intricate system of channels and vessels. Birds were living flying machines, their wings perfectly designed according to mathematical principles that humans might someday understand and replicate. Even the growth of plants followed mechanical laws, with roots growing toward water and leaves arranging themselves to capture the maximum amount of sunlight. As Leonardo entered his teenage years, his reputation as an unusual and gifted child began to spread beyond the small town of Vinci. Visitors to his father's house would often find the boy absorbed in some fascinating project, perhaps dissecting a flower to understand its structure, or building small mechanical devices from wood and string. His drawings scattered throughout the house showed an eye for detail and proportion that seemed far beyond his years. He could capture not just the appearance of things but their essential nature, the inner spirit that made a bird different from a butterfly, a young face different from an old one. It was during this time that Leonardo experienced what he would later describe as one of the most important moments of his life. He had been climbing in the hills above Vinci, exploring a series of caves that carved deep into the limestone cliffs, when he discovered something that would haunt and inspire him for the rest of his days. Deep within one of the caves, by the flickering light of his torch, he found the fossilized remains of ancient sea creatures, their shells and spiral forms perfectly preserved in what had once been the bottom of an ancient ocean. The discovery filled young Leonardo with a sense of wonder so profound it was almost frightening. Here, high in the mountains, far from any sea, lay proof that the world was far older and more mysterious than anyone imagined. These mountains had once been underwater. The earth itself was alive, constantly changing, lifting and shifting over periods of time so vast that human history was merely a brief moment in comparison. This revelation opened his mind to the possibility that everything he thought he knew about the world might be only a tiny fragment of a much grander truth waiting to be discovered. As he emerged from the cave that day, blinking in the afternoon sunlight, Leonardo carried with him not just the fossil shells but a new understanding of his purpose in life. He was meant to be an explorer, not of distant lands but of the hidden principles that governed all existence. Every flower, every cloud, every beating heart held secrets that could be unlocked through careful observation and patient study. The world was a vast book written in the language of mathematics and mechanics, and he would spend his life learning to read it. The transition from childhood to young adulthood is always a time of uncertainty, but for Leonardo it carried special challenges. His illegitimate birth meant that certain paths were closed to him. He could not inherit his father's notary practice, could not attend university, could not enter the church. Yet these limitations, which might have frustrated another boy, seemed only to fuel Leonardo's determination to create his own unique path through life. If he could not learn from books and professors, he would learn from nature itself, which was, after all, the greatest teacher of all. Ser Piero, watching his son's obvious talents develop, began to consider what future might await such an unusual young man. The boy showed no interest in commerce or agriculture, the typical occupations of their social class. His gifts clearly lay in the realm of art and observation, but how could such talents be transformed into a livelihood? It was Ser Piero's brother Francesco, a more worldly man who traveled frequently to Florence, who suggested the answer. Florence, that magnificent city that was becoming the center of artistic innovation in all of Italy, was full of workshops where talented young men could learn to become painters, sculptors, and architects. Perhaps Leonardo's unique gifts would find their proper home in such an environment. The idea of sending Leonardo to Florence filled the household with both excitement and apprehension. Florence was a great city, full of opportunities but also dangers for a young man from the countryside. Yet it was clear that Leonardo had outgrown the small world of Vinci. His mind needed challenges and stimulation that only a great center of learning and creativity could provide. His drawings had already surpassed anything that local artists could teach him, and his questions about engineering and mechanics required answers that could only be found in the workshops of master craftsmen. And so, on a crisp autumn morning when Leonardo was 14 years old, preparations began for the journey that would change his life forever. His stepmother Albiera packed his few belongings with care, including his precious collection of drawings and notebooks. Ser Piero arranged for letters of introduction to various acquaintances in Florence, hoping to smooth his son's path into the competitive world of artistic apprenticeship. But perhaps most importantly, old Antonio, Leonardo's grandfather, took the boy aside for a final conversation that would echo in Leonardo's mind for decades to come. "Remember," the old man said,
his weathered hands resting on Leonardo's shoulders. Everything you need to know is already written in the world around you. Books and teachers can guide you, but the greatest truths come from watching carefully and thinking deeply about what you see. Never stop asking questions, never stop wondering why things are as they are. The world is full of miracles hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone wise enough to notice them. As the cart carrying Leonardo and his father wound its way through the Tuscan hills toward Florence, the young man looked back one final time at the valley where he had spent his childhood. The vineyards glowed golden in the morning sun, and the cypress trees stood like dark brushstrokes against the pale sky. Somewhere in those hills were the caves where he had first glimpsed the vast mystery of geological time, the streams where he had studied the flow of water, the meadows where he had watched birds learn to fly. All of this would remain with him, a foundation of wonder and careful observation that would support everything he would later achieve. The road to Florence stretched ahead, dusty and uncertain, but filled with promise. Leonardo felt a familiar excitement building within him, the same feeling he had experienced as a child, whenever he was about to explore a new cave or climb a previously unvisited hill. He was embarking on the greatest adventure of his life, though he could not yet imagine where it would lead him. In his traveling bundle, wrapped carefully in cloth, were the drawings and notes that represented 14 years of careful observation and growing understanding. Soon these would be joined by thousands more, as Leonardo began to document not just what he saw, but what he dreamed of creating. Florence revealed itself gradually as their cart approached the city walls, like a magnificent painting slowly coming into focus. First came the outlying farms and villages, then the clusters of workshops and mills that had grown up along the Arno River to take advantage of its flowing power. The air itself seemed different here, charged with energy and possibility. Leonardo could smell the smoke from countless forges and kilns, hear the rhythm of hammers on metal and stone, see the constant movement of people carrying materials and finished goods through the streets. This was a city devoted to making things, to transforming raw materials into objects of beauty and utility, through the application of human skill and imagination. As they passed through the city gates, Leonardo's eyes widened at the sheer scale of human ambition surrounding him. Buildings rose higher than any he had ever seen, their facades decorated with intricate stonework that must have required years of patient carving. Churches soared toward the sky, their towers and domes challenging the very clouds, and everywhere there were workshops, their doors thrown open to reveal craftsmen bent over their work, apprentices grinding pigments or mixing plaster, the flash of gold leaf being applied to altarpieces that would soon grace the greatest churches of Italy. The workshop of Andrea del Verrocchio, where Ser Piero hoped to place his son, occupied a substantial building near the heart of the city's artistic quarter. As they approached its heavy wooden doors, Leonardo could hear the sounds of busy creativity from within, the scraping of chisels on marble, the soft whisper of brushes on canvas, voices discussing the proper proportion of figures or the most effective way to capture the play of light on fabric. This was exactly the kind of environment Leonardo's restless mind had been yearning for, a place where questions about how things worked were not merely tolerated but essential to the daily work.
Verrocchio himself was a man in his 30s, possessed of that particular combination of artistic vision and practical skill that made him one of Florence's most sought-after masters. His workshop produced everything from delicate jewelry to monumental bronze sculptures, from painted altarpieces to architectural decorations. When he first met Leonardo, examining the drawings the young man had brought from Vinci, Verrocchio recognized immediately that he was looking at talent of an extraordinary kind. The boy's observations of natural forms showed an understanding of structure and proportion that most artists took years to develop. Yet there was something even more remarkable in these sketches, a sense that their creator was interested not just in how things looked, but in the deeper principles that governed their existence. Leonardo's first months in Verrocchio's workshop were a period of intense learning and adaptation. The skills required of a Renaissance apprentice were far more diverse than those of a simple painter. He had to learn to prepare wooden panels for painting, grinding and mixing pigments to achieve exactly the right colors and textures. He studied the properties of different materials, how copper responded differently to the chisel than marble, why certain combinations of oils and resins created more durable paint films, how the grain of wood affected the way it could be carved. Each lesson revealed new layers of complexity in what had seemed like simple processes, and Leonardo absorbed every detail with the same intense focus he had once brought to studying watermills and bird flight. But it was in the area of drawing that Leonardo's exceptional gifts became most apparent to his fellow apprentices and to Verrocchio himself. While other students struggled to capture the basic proportions of the human figure, Leonardo seemed to see immediately the underlying geometric relationships that determined how a head related to a torso, how the length of an arm corresponded to the height of a figure. More than that, he could sense the subtle play of muscles beneath the skin, the way weight shifted as a figure moved from one position to another. His drawings possessed a quality of life that made them seem to breathe on the paper. Verrocchio, recognizing this exceptional talent, began to give Leonardo increasingly complex and important tasks. Where other apprentices might be assigned to paint drapery or background details, Leonardo found himself working on the central figures of major commissions. His fellow students watched in amazement as he would spend hours studying a single hand, making dozens of preliminary sketches to understand exactly how the bones and tendons created its structure, how light fell across its surface to reveal its three-dimensional form. What might have seemed like obsessive perfectionism in another person appeared in Leonardo as a natural expression of his insatiable curiosity about the workings of the world. The intellectual atmosphere of Florence in these years was unlike anything Europe had seen since the classical age of Greece and Rome. Scholars were rediscovering ancient texts that had been lost for centuries, translating works of philosophy, mathematics, and natural science that opened entirely new ways of understanding the universe. The invention of printing had made books more widely available than ever before, and ideas that had once been confined to monastery libraries were now debated in workshops and private homes throughout the city. Leonardo found himself at the center of a revolution in human knowledge, surrounded by people who shared his belief that the world could be understood through careful observation and logical thought. In the evenings, after the day's work in the workshop was finished, Leonardo would often join gatherings of artists, philosophers, and scientists who met to discuss the great questions of their time. These conversations ranged across every conceivable topic: the proper way to represent perspective in painting, the mathematical principles underlying musical harmony, the reasons why certain plants grew toward light while others seemed to thrive in shadow. Leonardo listened intently to these discussions, but increasingly he found himself contributing observations drawn from his own direct experience of the natural world. His years of wandering through the Tuscan countryside, studying everything from the flow of streams to the structure of flowers, had given him a foundation of empirical knowledge that complemented the theoretical learning of his more formally educated colleagues. It was during one of these evening gatherings that Leonardo first encountered the writings of ancient engineers and architects who had grappled with problems similar to those that fascinated him. He learned about Archimedes and his discoveries regarding leverage and the displacement of water, about Roman engineers who had built aqueducts and roads that still functioned after more than 1,000 years. These examples from the past showed him that his dream of understanding and harnessing the forces of nature was not merely fantasy, but part of a long tradition of human inquiry that stretched back to the very foundations of civilization. As Leonardo's skills as an artist continued to develop, he began to chafe against some of the limitations of traditional workshop practice. Most painters of his time were content to follow established formulas for representing the human figure, using conventional proportions and poses that had been handed down from master to apprentice for generations. But Leonardo's direct observation of real people convinced him that these formulas, while useful as starting points, failed to capture the infinite variety and subtle complexity of actual human beings. He began to make clandestine visits to hospitals and morgues, where he could study anatomy directly, sketching the structure of muscles and organs with the same careful attention he had once devoted to the mechanics of watermills. These anatomical investigations, conducted by candlelight in cold stone chambers, revealed to Leonardo truths about the human body that challenged many accepted beliefs of his time. He discovered that the heart was not simply a furnace that heated the blood, as ancient authorities had claimed, but a complex pump with chambers and valves that worked according to mechanical principles. He traced the pathways of nerves and blood vessels, mapping the body's internal geography with the precision of a cartographer charting unknown continents. Each dissection taught him something new about the marvelous machine that was the human form, and this knowledge flowed directly into his art, giving his painted figures a sense of internal structure and vitality that set them apart from the work of his contemporaries. The technical challenges of painting also spurred Leonardo to innovations that would influence artists for centuries to come. Dissatisfied with the traditional method of mixing pigments with egg yolk to create tempera paint, he began experimenting with oil-based media that allowed for more subtle gradations of color and tone. He developed new techniques for creating the soft, almost imperceptible transitions from light to shadow that would become one of the most recognizable characteristics of his mature style. His fellow apprentices watched in fascination as he would spend entire days working on a small section of drapery or the curve of a cheek, building up layers of translucent color until the painted surface seemed to glow with inner light.
But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Leonardo's development during these years was the way his artistic practice began to merge with his scientific investigations. He realized that truly accurate representation of the natural world required deep understanding of its underlying principles. To paint water convincingly, he needed to understand the physics of fluid motion. To depict the human figure with complete accuracy, he had to master anatomy and proportion. To create convincing architectural backgrounds, he needed to understand the mathematics of perspective and the engineering principles that kept buildings standing. Art and science, rather than being separate disciplines, were different aspects of a single quest to comprehend and represent the marvels of creation. This integration of artistic and scientific thinking set Leonardo apart not only from other artists of his time, but from the scholars and philosophers who typically pursued knowledge for its own sake without concern for practical application. Leonardo's approach was fundamentally different. He sought to understand nature in order to work with it more effectively, whether he was mixing pigments that would retain their brilliance for centuries or designing machines that could accomplish tasks beyond the power of human muscle alone. His notebooks from this period, filled with sketches that moved seamlessly from studies of flower petals to designs for mechanical devices, bear witness to a mind that recognized no boundaries between the realm of the beautiful and the domain of the useful. As his reputation in Florence continued to grow, Leonardo found himself receiving commissions that would have challenged even experienced masters. Wealthy patrons, impressed by examples of his work they had seen in Verrocchio's workshop, began requesting paintings directly from this remarkably talented young artist. Each new project presented Leonardo with opportunities to push the boundaries of his technique and to explore new ways of solving the eternal problems that faced every painter: how to create the illusion of three-dimensional space on a flat surface, how to suggest the texture of different materials, how to capture not just the appearance but the inner character of the people he portrayed. The painting that would establish Leonardo's reputation as an independent master was an Annunciation, depicting the moment when the angel Gabriel appears to the Virgin Mary to announce that she will bear the Christ child. This subject had been painted thousands of times before, but Leonardo approached it with fresh eyes, determined to make every element as convincing and emotionally resonant as possible. He spent weeks studying the way light fell through windows at different times of day, observing how it affected the appearance of fabrics and architectural details. He made countless drawings of hands in various positions, searching for exactly the right gesture to express Mary's mixture of surprise and humble acceptance. He even studied the flight patterns of birds to ensure that the angel's wings would appear capable of actually supporting flight, rather than being merely decorative appendages. When the Annunciation was finally completed and displayed, viewers were struck by its unprecedented sense of reality and presence. The figures seemed to exist in actual space rather than floating in the timeless realm that characterized most religious art of the period. Mary's face showed genuine emotion, not the stylized expressions typical of sacred painting, but the complex mixture of wonder, fear, and acceptance that a real young woman might experience upon receiving such momentous news. The angel's arrival was depicted not as a serene visitation, but as a dynamic event, with drapery still settling from the motion of flight and wings that seemed to have just folded after touching earth. But it was in the landscape background that Leonardo's innovations were most revolutionary. Instead of the conventional golden sky or simplified architectural setting that most artists used, he painted an expansive view of the Arno Valley, complete with winding river, distant mountains, and atmospheric effects that made the far peaks seem to shimmer in hazy air. This landscape was not merely decorative but integral to the painting's meaning, suggesting that this sacred moment was taking place not in some otherworldly realm but in the actual world that viewers could recognize and inhabit. The careful observation of natural phenomena that Leonardo had practiced since childhood now served his art, allowing him to create painted worlds that felt as real as the one outside the viewer's window. The success of the Annunciation brought Leonardo to the attention of Lorenzo de' Medici, the unofficial ruler of Florence, and one of the most influential patrons of art and learning in all of Europe. Lorenzo, known to history as the Magnificent, had created around himself a circle of the most brilliant minds of his age, philosophers who were rediscovering the wisdom of ancient Greece, poets who were crafting new forms of vernacular literature, architects who were reviving the classical principles of proportion and harmony. Into this stimulating environment, Leonardo was welcomed not merely as a talented painter, but as a thinker whose insights into the workings of nature might contribute to the broader project of human understanding that the Renaissance represented. In Lorenzo's palace and gardens, Leonardo encountered ideas and personalities that expanded his intellectual horizons beyond anything he had previously imagined. He met scholars who could read Greek and Latin fluently, opening to him the works of ancient philosophers and scientists in their original languages. He conversed with mathematicians who were developing new ways of calculating and representing numerical relationships, with musicians who were exploring the mathematical foundations of harmony, with architects who were applying geometric principles to create buildings of unprecedented beauty and structural integrity. Each conversation was an education, each new acquaintance a doorway into unexplored realms of knowledge. It was during this period that Leonardo began to develop his distinctive method of inquiry, which he would later describe as learning through the eyes rather than through books. While he respected the wisdom of ancient authorities, he trusted his own direct observation more completely. If a classical text claimed that water always flowed in straight lines, but Leonardo could see streams meandering across the landscape in graceful curves, then the text must be incomplete or incorrect. If traditional anatomy books showed the human heart as having only 2 chambers, but his dissections revealed 4, then the books needed to be revised.
This empirical approach, which seems natural to us today, was revolutionary in Leonardo's time, when most learning consisted of commenting upon and interpreting established texts rather than investigating nature directly. Leonardo's notebooks from this period reveal the extraordinary breadth of his curiosity and the systematic nature of his investigations. On a single page, he might sketch the mechanical advantage provided by different types of levers, analyze the pattern of turbulence in flowing water, and design a more efficient loom for weaving cloth. His mind moved effortlessly between the practical and the theoretical, the artistic and the scientific, finding connections and analogies that escaped more specialized thinkers. He began to see the human body as a microcosm of the larger world, with blood flowing through arteries like rivers through valleys, with the structure of bones reflecting the same principles of leverage and support that governed architectural engineering. As Leonardo's reputation grew, he began to receive commissions that challenged him to apply his developing knowledge in new ways. One of the most significant was a request to paint a portrait of Cecilia Gallerani, the young mistress of Ludovico Sforza, the Duke of Milan. This commission would require Leonardo to travel to Milan, leaving behind the familiar environment of Florence for a court that valued artistic innovation, but also demanded practical results. The Duke was interested not only in beautiful paintings but in engineering projects that could enhance the power and prestige of his duchy. Leonardo saw this as an opportunity to demonstrate that his investigations into the principles of nature could produce not only art but useful inventions. The portrait of Cecilia, which would come to be known as Lady with an Ermine, marked another breakthrough in Leonardo's artistic development. Instead of the 4 more static poses typical of court portraiture, he chose to show his subject in a moment of animated conversation. Her body turns slightly away from the viewer while her head turns back with an expression of intelligent engagement. The ermine she holds, a symbol of purity, but also a creature Leonardo had studied carefully to understand its anatomy and behavior, appears alert and lifelike rather than merely decorative. The painting demonstrates Leonardo's growing mastery of what he called the motions of the mind, the subtle ways in which inner thoughts and emotions express themselves through posture, gesture, and facial expression. But perhaps more important than any individual painting from this period was Leonardo's development of a comprehensive theory of artistic practice that integrated all of his various interests and investigations. He began to write systematic treatises on painting, anatomy, engineering, and natural philosophy, works that were intended not merely to record his discoveries but to establish new methods of inquiry that others could follow. These writings, scattered through thousands of pages of notebooks written in his characteristic mirror script, represent one of the most ambitious attempts in human history to create a unified understanding of the natural world and humanity's place within it. Leonardo's approach to knowledge was fundamentally different from that of the medieval scholars who had preceded him, where they had sought to reconcile observation with established authority. Leonardo trusted observation absolutely and was willing to overturn any theory, no matter how venerable, if it contradicted what he could see and measure. Where they had divided knowledge into separate categories, theology, philosophy, mathematics, medicine, Leonardo recognized that all phenomena were interconnected aspects of a single comprehensible natural order. His investigations of water flow informed his understanding of blood circulation, which in turn influenced his technique for painting flesh tones. which led him to new insights about the behavior of light, which opened new possibilities for architectural design. This integrated approach to learning made Leonardo one of the first true scientists in the modern sense of the term. He developed hypotheses based on observation, tested them through experiments, and modified his theories in light of new evidence. His studies of bird flight, for example, began with careful sketches of wing structure and feather arrangement, proceeded through detailed analysis of the mechanics of flapping and soaring, and culminated in designs for flying machines that incorporated his understanding of aerodynamic principles. While his ornithopters were never successfully built in his lifetime, they demonstrated a systematic approach to engineering that would eventually lead to human flight. The years Leonardo spent in Milan were among the most productive of his entire life. The court of Ludovico Sforza provided him with resources and challenges that pushed his abilities to their limits. He was asked to design elaborate theatrical productions that required innovations in stage machinery and special effects. He planned irrigation systems and military fortifications that demanded deep understanding of hydraulic engineering and ballistics. He began work on a massive bronze statue of Ludovico's father that would have been the largest equestrian monument ever created, a project that required him to study not only the anatomy of horses, but the metallurgy of bronze casting and the engineering challenges of creating and moving enormous molds. Each of these projects contributed to Leonardo's growing understanding of the mechanical principles that governed both natural phenomena and human artifacts. His theatrical machines taught him about the transformation of motion from one form to another, how the circular motion of a hand crank could be converted to the linear motion of a rising backdrop, or the oscillating motion of artificial wings. His hydraulic projects revealed the laws governing fluid pressure and flow that would later influence his designs for canals, fountains, and even flying machines. His military engineering forced him to consider the mathematics of projectile motion and the metallurgy of cannon construction, but it was during this period that Leonardo also began work on the painting that would become his most famous creation and one of the most recognizable images in all of human culture. The Last Supper, painted on the wall of the convent of Santa Maria delle Grazie, presented Leonardo with the challenge of depicting not just a single moment in the Christian narrative, but the complex psychological drama that unfolded when Jesus announced to his disciples that one of them would betray him. This was a subject that demanded all of Leonardo's skills as an observer of human nature, his understanding of anatomy and proportion, his mastery of perspective and composition, and his ability to create the illusion of three-dimensional space on a flat surface. Leonardo approached the Last Supper with the same systematic methodology he brought to his scientific investigations. He made countless preparatory drawings, studying the facial expressions and gestures appropriate to each disciple's character and emotional response to Jesus' shocking announcement. He experimented with different arrangements of the figures, seeking a composition that would create visual harmony while also conveying the dramatic tension of the scene. He investigated new painting techniques that would allow him to work more slowly and deliberately than traditional fresco methods permitted, developing an experimental mixture of oil and tempera that would let him achieve the subtle gradations of light and shadow that had become his signature. The process of creating the Last Supper became an obsession that consumed Leonardo for nearly 3 years. Monks at the convent grew accustomed to seeing him arrive at dawn and work steadily through the morning, then spend long afternoons simply standing before the wall studying what he had painted, making notes, occasionally adding a single brushstroke to a hand or face before departing as the evening light faded. Some days he would paint with intense concentration for hours, other days he would make no visible progress at all, instead walking through the streets of Milan searching for faces that might serve as models for specific disciples, or returning to his workshop to conduct experiments with pigments and binding agents. This methodical approach mystified the monks, who were accustomed to artists who worked quickly and efficiently to complete their commissions. They complained to Duke Ludovico that Leonardo was wasting time, that the painting would never be finished if he continued to work so slowly. But Leonardo understood that what he was attempting had never been done before. He was not simply illustrating a familiar story, but creating a new form of visual narrative, one that would reveal the inner thoughts and emotions of each figure through the subtlest details of expression and gesture. This required not just technical skill, but profound psychological insight, an understanding of human nature that could only be achieved through patient observation and reflection. The completed Last Supper was unlike any religious painting that had come before it. Instead of the formal, symmetrical arrangements typical of the subject, Leonardo created a dynamic composition that seemed to pulse with life and movement. The disciples were arranged in 4 groups of 3, each group responding differently to Jesus' announcement, their poses and expressions revealing their individual personalities and relationships to their master.
Some leaned forward in shock and disbelief, others recoiled in horror, still others turned to their neighbors seeking explanation or reassurance. At the center of this swirling emotional storm sat Jesus himself, his arms outstretched in a gesture that seemed to embrace both the meal they were sharing and the sacrifice he was about to make. But perhaps most revolutionary was Leonardo's treatment of space and perspective. The painted room appeared to be a continuation of the actual refectory where the monks took their meals, as if the wall had become transparent to reveal this sacred drama taking place in the same architectural setting. The mathematical precision of the perspective system drew the viewer's eye inexorably toward the figure of Christ, while the play of light and shadow created an almost supernatural sense of presence and immediacy. Those who viewed the painting felt as if they were witnessing the actual historical moment, not merely looking at a representation of it. The success of The Last Supper established Leonardo's reputation as the greatest painter of his age, but it also marked the beginning of a period of increasing restlessness and dissatisfaction with the limitations of painting as a means of exploring the natural world. His notebooks from this period show him turning more and more frequently to engineering and scientific projects that promised to unlock mysteries that no amount of artistic skill could illuminate. He designed machines for grinding lenses that might reveal previously invisible aspects of the natural world. He planned ambitious hydraulic projects that would demonstrate humanity's ability to redirect and control the forces of nature. He began systematic studies of human anatomy that went far beyond what was necessary for artistic purposes, seeking to understand the body as a complete functioning system. This shift in Leonardo's priorities reflected his growing conviction that the ultimate goal of human inquiry should be not merely to represent the world but to understand and improve it. Art, no matter how skillful or beautiful, remained fundamentally passive. It could show how things appeared but not explain why they were as they were, or how they might be changed. Engineering and scientific investigation, by contrast, offered the possibility of actual intervention in natural processes, the chance to solve practical problems, and to extend human capabilities beyond their natural limits. Leonardo's investigations during this period were extraordinarily wide-ranging and systematic. His anatomical studies, conducted through the dissection of human corpses obtained from hospitals and executed criminals, revealed the structure and function of every organ system in unprecedented detail. He traced the pathways of individual nerves, mapped the chambers and valves of the heart, documented the development of the human fetus from conception to birth. His drawings of these dissections were not merely illustrations but analytical tools that helped him understand the mechanical principles underlying biological processes. These anatomical investigations led Leonardo to insights that would not be confirmed by mainstream science for centuries. He recognized that the heart was a four-chambered pump, rather than the two-chambered organ described in classical texts. He understood that blood circulated through the body rather than being consumed and regenerated as ancient authorities claimed. He identified the function of heart valves in preventing the backflow of blood, and described the role of arterial walls in maintaining blood pressure. His notebooks contain detailed descriptions of arteriosclerosis, accurate depictions of the structure of the brain and nervous system, and precise illustrations of muscular and skeletal anatomy that surpassed anything available to contemporary physicians. But Leonardo's scientific investigations were not limited to anatomy. His studies of water flow, conducted through careful observation of streams and rivers, as well as controlled experiments with artificial channels and containers, led him to understand principles of hydraulic engineering that would not be formally articulated until the development of modern fluid mechanics. He recognized that water always seeks the shortest path to its destination, that the velocity of flow increases as the cross-sectional area of a channel decreases, and that turbulence occurs when flowing water encounters obstacles or changes direction. These insights informed his designs for canals, irrigation systems, and industrial machinery that used water power more efficiently than existing methods. Leonardo's interest in flight, which had begun with his childhood observations of birds, developed during these years into a systematic investigation of aerodynamic principles. He studied the anatomy of bird wings in minute detail, documenting how different species achieved different types of flight through variations in wing shape and motion. He experimented with artificial wings of various designs, testing their ability to generate lift and control direction. He designed flying machines that incorporated his understanding of these principles, including ornithopters with flapping wings, gliders with fixed wings, and even primitive helicopters with rotating airfoils. Although none of Leonardo's flying machines were successfully built during his lifetime, they demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of the forces involved in flight and the mechanical principles necessary to achieve it. His designs showed that he grasped the importance of wing shape in generating lift, the need for control surfaces to maintain stability, and the problems of weight and power that would need to be solved before human flight could become practical. In many cases, his solutions anticipated developments that would not occur until the 20th century, when materials and engines finally became available that could make his visions reality. The breadth and depth of Leonardo's scientific investigations during his mature years place him among the greatest researchers in human history. He approached each subject with the same combination of careful observation, systematic experimentation, and theoretical analysis that characterizes modern scientific method. He was not content simply to accept traditional explanations but insisted on testing every hypothesis against direct experience. He developed new instruments and techniques for measuring and recording natural phenomena, and he created visual representations that clarified complex relationships and processes in ways that words alone could not achieve. Yet for all his scientific accomplishments, Leonardo never abandoned his identity as an artist. His paintings from this period, though fewer in number than his earlier works, showed an even greater integration of artistic vision with scientific understanding. Each portrait revealed not only the external appearance of its subject, but insights into character and psychology that reflected Leonardo's deep knowledge of human nature. His landscape backgrounds incorporated atmospheric effects and geological formations that demonstrated his understanding of natural processes. Even his unfinished works showed a level of psychological penetration and technical mastery that set them apart from the productions of his contemporaries. The painting that best exemplifies this mature integration of art and science is the portrait known as the Mona Lisa, which Leonardo began around 1503 and continued to work on intermittently for the rest of his life. This deceptively simple image of a Florentine merchant's wife incorporates virtually every aspect of Leonardo's accumulated knowledge and experience. The subject's enigmatic smile reflects his understanding of the subtle ways in which inner emotions express themselves through facial muscles. The soft modeling of her features demonstrates his mastery of light and shadow, and his knowledge of the underlying bone and tissue structure. The atmospheric landscape background shows his ability to represent the effects of distance and humidity on the appearance of natural forms. But the Mona Lisa is more than just a demonstration of technical skill. It represents Leonardo's attempt to create a new type of portrait that would reveal the essential nature of its subject, rather than merely recording external appearance. The direct gaze and slight smile suggest an inner life and intelligence that transcends the specific historical moment in which the painting was created. The careful balance of realistic detail and idealized beauty creates an image that seems both perfectly naturalistic and somehow beyond the ordinary world. The result is a painting that has fascinated viewers for centuries, not simply because of its artistic excellence, but because it seems to embody something fundamental about human consciousness and experience. As Leonardo entered his 50s, he found himself increasingly drawn to projects that promised to synthesize all of his various interests and investigations into comprehensive systems of knowledge. He began work on treatises that would explain the fundamental principles underlying painting, engineering, anatomy, and natural philosophy, creating unified theories that would demonstrate the essential connections between all forms of inquiry. These works, had they been completed and published, might have accelerated the development of modern science by decades or even centuries. Leonardo's notebooks from this period reveal a mind working at the very limits of human intellectual capacity. Single pages contain insights that span multiple disciplines, with mechanical inventions illustrated alongside anatomical discoveries, optical theories developed in conjunction with artistic techniques, mathematical proofs integrated with poetic observations about the beauty of natural forms. The scope and originality of his thinking during these years established him not just as a great artist, but as one of the most important figures in the history of human thought. The political upheavals that swept through Italy at the turn of the 16th century brought dramatic changes to Leonardo's life and work. The French invasion of 1499 forced Duke Ludovico to flee Milan, leaving Leonardo without his primary patron and the resources that had supported his ambitious projects for nearly 2 decades. The great bronze horse that was to have been his masterpiece was never completed. The metal intended for the statue was instead used to make cannons for the Duke's defense against the invading armies. Leonardo found himself once again without a permanent home, carrying his precious notebooks and unfinished paintings as he sought new patrons who might appreciate his unique combination of artistic and scientific talents. This period of uncertainty and displacement, which might have discouraged a lesser spirit, seemed only to intensify Leonardo's creative energy. Freed from the demands of court life and major commissions, he devoted himself more completely than ever to pure research, pursuing investigations that followed his curiosity wherever it might lead, rather than serving the practical needs of wealthy patrons. His notebooks from these years show an extraordinary flowering of original thinking across every field that interested him, as if the enforced simplicity of his circumstances allowed his mind to operate with even greater clarity and focus. During his second stay in Florence, Leonardo began a project that would occupy him intermittently for the rest of his life, a comprehensive study of water in all its forms and behaviors. He had always been fascinated by the flow of streams and rivers, but now he set out to understand water as a fundamental force that shaped the entire natural world. He studied rainfall and evaporation, the formation of clouds and the patterns of wind that carried them across the sky. He investigated the way water carved valleys and canyons over geological time, the processes that created caves and underground rivers, the forces that lifted water from deep wells to mountain springs. These hydrological studies led Leonardo to insights about the age and history of the Earth that challenged fundamental beliefs of his time. By observing the layers of sediment in river valleys and the fossils embedded in mountain rocks, he concluded that the Earth must be far older than the biblical account suggested. He recognized that what were now high mountains had once been beneath the sea, that the geography of continents had changed repeatedly over vast periods of time. These conclusions, which would not be accepted by mainstream science for centuries, demonstrated Leonardo's willingness to follow evidence wherever it led, regardless of how revolutionary the implications might be. Leonardo's geological investigations were closely connected to his continued work in anatomy and physiology. He saw the Earth as a living body, with water flowing through it like blood through veins and arteries. Mountain ranges were like the skeleton of a great organism, with rivers serving as its circulatory system and caves as its internal organs. This vision of the Earth as a dynamic, changing entity rather than a static stage for human activity reflected his deep understanding of both biological and geological processes. The anatomical work that Leonardo pursued during these later years was even more systematic and comprehensive than his earlier investigations. He dissected bodies of people who had died at different ages, documenting the changes that occurred in organs and tissues over the course of a human lifetime. He studied the anatomy of various animals, comparing their structures to those of humans, and seeking to understand the functional reasons for the differences. He made detailed investigations of the eye, the ear, and other sense organs, trying to understand the physical mechanisms by which the soul perceived and interpreted the external world. These anatomical studies led Leonardo to philosophical reflections on the nature of life itself. He began to see life not as a mysterious spiritual force but as a complex mechanical process that could be understood through careful study of its physical manifestations. The heart was a pump, the lungs were bellows, the muscles were levers and pulleys. Yet this mechanical understanding did not diminish his sense of wonder at the elegance and complexity of living systems. If anything, it increased his appreciation for the subtle engineering principles that allowed such intricate machines to function with perfect coordination for decades without conscious supervision. Leonardo's approach to the study of life was fundamentally different from that of the physicians and natural philosophers of his time, where they relied primarily on ancient texts and theoretical speculation. He trusted only what he could observe and measure directly. Where they were content with general descriptions and approximate explanations, he insisted on precise quantification and exact understanding of cause and effect relationships. His anatomical drawings were not simply illustrations but research instruments that helped him analyze the structure and function of complex organic systems. During this period, Leonardo also turned his attention more seriously to the problem of human flight, which had fascinated him since childhood, but which he now approached with all the knowledge and analytical tools he had developed over decades of scientific investigation. He recognized that successful flight would require not just understanding of aerodynamic principles, but also solutions to problems of materials, power, and control. His flying machine designs from this period showed increasing sophistication and practical realism, incorporating features like articulated wings that could change shape during flight and control surfaces that would allow the pilot to maintain stability and direction. Leonardo's studies of bird flight during these years were extraordinarily detailed and perceptive. He observed that different species used different flight strategies depending on their size, weight, and environmental conditions. Large birds like eagles relied primarily on soaring, using their broad wings to ride air currents with minimal energy expenditure. Smaller birds like swallows used rapid wing beats to achieve high maneuverability and speed. He documented the way birds adjusted their wing angle and tail position to control their flight path, and he noted how they coordinated the movements of different body parts to achieve smooth transitions between different types of flight. These observations led Leonardo to design flying machines that attempted to replicate the most successful aspects of natural flight while adapting them to human capabilities and limitations. His ornithopters featured wings that could change their angle of attack during the
the flapping cycle, mimicking the complex motions he had observed in birds. His gliders incorporated control surfaces that would allow human pilots to steer and maintain balance. His helicopter designs showed understanding of the principles that would eventually make rotary wing aircraft possible, though the materials and power sources available in his time were inadequate to make such machines practical. But Leonardo's investigations during this period extended far beyond the problems of flight and anatomy. His notebooks reveal sustained work on optics, acoustics, geology, botany, and pure mathematics. He designed new types of telescopes and microscopes that might reveal previously invisible aspects of the natural world. He investigated the physics of sound and the mathematical relationships underlying musical harmony. He studied the growth patterns of plants and trees, seeking to understand the geometric principles that governed their forms. He explored problems in pure geometry that would not be solved by professional mathematicians for centuries. The breadth and depth of Leonardo's intellectual activity during his mature years is almost impossible to comprehend from our modern perspective, when knowledge has become so specialized that few individuals can achieve expertise in more than one narrow field. Leonardo not only worked successfully in dozens of different areas but sought profound connections between them that escaped more specialized thinkers. His work in anatomy informed his mechanical engineering, which in turn influenced his artistic techniques, which led to new insights about optics and the behavior of light. This integration of different forms of knowledge was not accidental but reflected Leonardo's fundamental conviction that all natural phenomena were governed by the same underlying principles. He believed that by understanding these universal laws it would be possible to predict and control natural processes in ways that had never before been attempted.
His notebooks from this period contain designs for machines and processes that seem to anticipate technologies that would not be developed for centuries: automatic looms, printing presses, hydraulic pumps, precision timepieces, and countless other innovations that would eventually transform human civilization. Yet for all his scientific and technological achievements, Leonardo never lost his identity as an artist, or his conviction that beauty and truth were intimately connected. His paintings from this period, though few in number, represented the culmination of everything he had learned about human nature, natural processes, and the techniques needed to represent them convincingly. Each work was both a scientific investigation and an artistic creation, demonstrating that the pursuit of knowledge and the creation of beauty were not separate activities, but different aspects of a single quest to understand and celebrate the marvels of existence. The portrait of Mona Lisa, which Leonardo continued to refine throughout this period, exemplifies this integration of artistic and scientific vision. Every aspect of the painting reflects his accumulated knowledge, the precise anatomical understanding that allowed him to model the subject's features with such conviction, the mastery of atmospheric perspective that creates the mysterious landscape background, the sophisticated understanding of human psychology that gives the figure its enigmatic presence. Yet the painting transcends mere technical accomplishment to achieve something that pure science could never reach: a sense of the infinite complexity and beauty of human consciousness itself. As Leonardo entered his 60s, he began to experience the physical limitations that come with advancing age. His hands, which had been so steady and precise throughout his career, began to show signs of tremor that made detailed work increasingly difficult. His eyesight, though still keen, was no longer quite as sharp as it had been in his youth. These changes forced him to adapt his working methods, relying more heavily on assistance for routine tasks, while reserving his own efforts for the most critical aspects of each project. But if Leonardo's physical powers were beginning to decline, his intellectual energy remained as intense as ever. His notebooks from this period show him grappling with some of the most profound questions that had occupied him throughout his life: the nature of time and motion, the relationship between mind and matter, the ultimate causes of natural phenomena. He began to develop theoretical frameworks that would unite all of his various investigations into comprehensive systems of knowledge, works that might serve as guidebooks for future generations of researchers and inventors. These late theoretical works reveal Leonardo as not just a talented observer and experimenter, but as a systematic thinker capable of synthesizing vast amounts of information into coherent explanations of natural processes. His treatise on the movement of water, for example, connected his observations of fluid dynamics with his understanding of geological processes, his knowledge of plant physiology, and his insights into meteorology. His studies of human anatomy were integrated with his mechanical engineering to produce theories about the body as a self-regulating machine that maintained its own internal balance through feedback mechanisms that would not be understood by mainstream science for centuries. The invitation from King Francis I of France in 1516 came at a crucial moment in Leonardo's life. At 64, he was no longer the vigorous young artist who had first left Da Vinci for Florence, but his mind remained as sharp and curious as ever. The French king, himself a patron of Renaissance learning and art, offered Leonardo something that had become increasingly rare in the fractured political landscape of Italy: the security and resources necessary to pursue his investigations without the constant pressure of earning commissions or satisfying the immediate demands of patrons. The journey to France, undertaken in the autumn of 1516, was Leonardo's final great migration. He traveled slowly, accompanied by his faithful servant Battista and his devoted student Francesco Melzi, carrying with him a carefully selected collection of his most precious possessions: notebooks filled with decades of observations and discoveries, paintings including the Mona Lisa that he had never been willing to part with, and mechanical models that demonstrated his most important inventions. This baggage represented the accumulation of a lifetime's work, the tangible evidence of a mind that had explored the boundaries of human knowledge and understanding. The manor house at Clos-Lucé, which King Francis provided for Leonardo's use, was connected by an underground tunnel to the royal chateau at Amboise, allowing the aging master easy access to the court while maintaining the privacy necessary for his continued work. The house itself was comfortable and well appointed, with spacious rooms that could accommodate both his artistic studio and his scientific investigations. For the first time in many years, Leonardo found himself in circumstances that allowed him to work exactly as he wished, without external pressures or conflicting demands on his time and attention. The king's respect for Leonardo's achievements was both genuine and profound. Francis had been educated in the humanist tradition that valued learning for its own sake, and he understood that he was providing refuge not merely for a famous artist, but for one of the great minds of the age. Their conversations, conducted in the gardens of Clos-Lucé or during leisurely meals at the chateau, ranged across every subject that interested them both: the principles of good government, the design of ideal cities, the latest discoveries in astronomy and natural philosophy, the proper relationship between art and learning. These discussions with an intelligent and sympathetic patron seemed to energize Leonardo's creative faculties despite his advancing years. His notebooks from the French period show renewed activity in many of the areas that had long fascinated him. He designed elaborate court entertainments that combined his knowledge of mechanics with his understanding of theatrical effect, creating mechanical lions that could walk across a room and open their chests to reveal bouquets of flowers, or artificial birds that could fly through palace halls with convincing realism. But beyond these courtly diversions, Leonardo continued to pursue the serious investigations that had occupied him throughout his mature years. His anatomical studies, though necessarily limited by his reduced access to human subjects, became more theoretical and systematic. He worked on comprehensive treatises that would explain not just the structure of individual organs, but the principles that governed the functioning of living systems as integrated wholes. His understanding of the circulatory system, developed through years of dissection and observation, led him to insights about the heart's role as a muscular pump that would not be confirmed by medical science until well into the 17th century. Leonardo's geological investigations during these final years took on an almost visionary quality. His notebooks contain elaborate descriptions of the forces that shaped the Earth's surface over vast periods of time, theories about the formation of mountains and valleys that anticipated modern understanding of geological processes. He envisioned the Earth as a dynamic system in constant motion, with continents rising and falling, seas advancing and retreating, rivers changing their courses as they carved new channels through the landscape. These insights, based on careful observation of rock formations and fossil evidence, challenged the static view of Earth history that prevailed in his time. The mechanical inventions that Leonardo developed during his French sojourn showed increasing sophistication and practical applicability. His designs for automatic machinery, precision instruments, and efficient industrial processes demonstrated a clear understanding of the economic and social benefits that technology could provide. He created plans for textile mills that could operate with minimal human supervision, hydraulic systems that could supply clean water to entire cities, and transportation networks that could move goods and people with unprecedented speed and efficiency. Yet even as Leonardo's practical inventions became more refined and realistic, his purely theoretical investigations reached toward ever more fundamental questions about the nature of reality itself.
His studies of light and optics led him to speculate about the relationship between vision and knowledge, about whether the images we perceive correspond to the actual structure of the external world, or are somehow modified by the process of perception itself. His mathematical investigations explored the geometric principles underlying natural forms, seeking to discover whether beauty and truth were somehow identical or merely closely related. These philosophical reflections, scattered throughout notebooks filled with technical diagrams and scientific observations, reveal Leonardo as not only a remarkably skilled investigator, but as a profound thinker who understood the larger implications of his discoveries. He recognized that the scientific method he had developed, based on careful observation, systematic experimentation, and mathematical analysis, represented a new way of understanding the world that might eventually transform human civilization. Yet he also understood the limitations of purely rational inquiry, the mystery that remained at the heart of existence, despite all efforts to comprehend it completely. The relationship between Leonardo and his student Francesco Melzi, who had accompanied him to France, and who would remain with him until the end, provides a touching glimpse into the personal side of this extraordinary life. Melzi, young enough to be Leonardo's grandson, had become not only a skilled artist in his own right, but the trusted keeper of his master's intellectual legacy. He helped organize Leonardo's notebooks, made fair copies of important texts, and served as both secretary and companion during these final years, when Leonardo's physical limitations made sustained work increasingly difficult. Through Melzi's devoted care, Leonardo was able to continue his investigations, almost until the very end of his life. The younger man's skilled hands could execute the detailed drawings that Leonardo's aging fingers could no longer manage with perfect precision, while Leonardo's accumulated knowledge and theoretical understanding provided the intellectual framework for new discoveries. This collaboration between master and student exemplified the transmission of knowledge from one generation to the next that Leonardo had always considered essential to human progress. As Leonardo's health began to fail more noticeably in early 1519, his thoughts turned increasingly to the question of legacy, not just the preservation of his individual discoveries, but the continuation of the method of inquiry he had developed. He spent long hours dictating to Melzi, trying to organize his scattered observations into coherent treatises that future investigators might use as starting points for their own work. These final theoretical works, though never completed in the systematic form Leonardo envisioned, contain some of his most profound insights into the unity underlying all natural phenomena. Leonardo's understanding of his approaching death was characteristically clear-eyed and unsentimental. He had studied the process of dying through his anatomical investigations, observing the physical changes that occurred as life ebbed from the human body. He understood death as a natural process, no more mysterious in its essential nature than the other biological functions he had spent decades investigating. Yet this scientific understanding did not diminish his appreciation for the preciousness of consciousness and the tragedy inherent in the loss of a mind capable of understanding and creating. During his final weeks, Leonardo's thoughts seemed to turn more frequently to the landscape of his childhood, the Tuscan hills where he had first learned to observe nature carefully and to ask the questions that had guided his entire intellectual journey. He spoke to Melzi about the caves where he had discovered fossils that first suggested the Earth's vast age, about the streams whose flow patterns had taught him the principles of hydraulic engineering, about the birds whose flight had inspired his dreams of human aviation. These memories, vivid despite the passage of more than 6 decades, reminded him of the continuity that connected his earliest wonderment at natural phenomena with the sophisticated understanding he had achieved through a lifetime of systematic investigation. The mechanical models and artistic works that filled Leonardo's study at Clos-Lucé bore witness to the extraordinary scope of his achievements. Flying machines with articulated wings demonstrated his understanding of aerodynamic principles. Anatomical drawings revealed the structure and function of every organ system in the human body. Architectural plans showed how mathematical principles could be applied to create buildings of unprecedented beauty and structural integrity. Each object represented not just a solution to a specific problem, but a step in the long journey toward comprehensive understanding of the natural world. As spring arrived in the Loire Valley in 1519, Leonardo found himself increasingly weak, but still intellectually engaged with the questions that had fascinated him throughout his life. His final notebooks contain observations about the behavior of flowing water, sketches of mechanical devices that might harness natural forces more efficiently, and theoretical speculations about the ultimate unity underlying the apparent diversity of natural phenomena. Even as his physical strength ebbed, his mind remained focused on the great work of understanding that he had pursued for more than 7 decades. On May 2, 1519, as gentle rain fell on the gardens of Clos-Lucé and the Loire River flowed peacefully toward the sea, Leonardo da Vinci's long journey of discovery came to its end. Francesco Melzi, who had remained constantly at his master's bedside during these final days, recorded that Leonardo faced death with the same calm curiosity he had brought to every other natural phenomenon he had encountered. His last words, according to Melzi, were a regretful acknowledgement that he had not accomplished all he had hoped to achieve, that so many mysteries remained unsolved, so many inventions remained incomplete. Yet even in expressing these regrets, Leonardo demonstrated the humility and intellectual honesty that had characterized his entire approach to learning. He understood that individual human life, no matter how productive or insightful, could only contribute a small part to the larger project of understanding that engaged all thoughtful people across the generations. His true legacy lay not in any specific discovery or invention, but in the method of inquiry he had developed and exemplified, the conviction that careful observation, systematic experimentation, and fearless questioning could gradually unlock the secrets of nature and expand human capabilities beyond their apparent limits. In the days following Leonardo's death, as Francesco Melzi began the overwhelming task of organizing his master's papers and possessions, the true scope of his intellectual achievement became fully apparent. Thousands of pages of notes and drawings, written in Leonardo's distinctive mirror script, revealed investigations that spanned virtually every field of human knowledge. There were detailed studies of human anatomy that surpassed anything available to contemporary physicians, engineering designs for machines that would not be successfully built for centuries, optical theories that anticipated fundamental discoveries about the nature of light, mathematical investigations that explored problems at the very frontiers of geometric understanding. Perhaps most remarkably, these diverse investigations were unified by a consistent methodology and a coherent vision of the natural world as a comprehensible system governed by discoverable laws. Leonardo had not simply accumulated random facts about isolated phenomena, but had developed an integrated understanding that connected the flow of blood through the human heart with the movement of water through river channels, the flight of birds with the principles of mechanical engineering, the growth of plants with the mathematical relationships that governed architectural proportion. This systematic approach to knowledge represented something genuinely new in human history. While ancient Greek philosophers had speculated about the underlying unity of natural phenomena, and medieval scholars had sought to reconcile observation with established authority, Leonardo had developed a method of inquiry that combined theoretical insight with practical experimentation in ways that made genuine discovery possible. His approach was neither purely empirical nor purely rational, but it integrated both observation and analysis into a coherent method that could be applied to any subject that aroused his curiosity. The notebooks that Melzi inherited contained not only Leonardo's discoveries but detailed descriptions of the methods he had used to achieve them. Future investigators could learn not just what Leonardo had found but how he had gone about finding it. His anatomical studies, for example, were accompanied by careful descriptions of dissection techniques, preservation methods, and drawing procedures that would allow others to replicate and extend his work. His mechanical inventions were illustrated with detailed diagrams that showed not only the finished designs, but the step-by-step process of development that had led to them. This methodological legacy was perhaps even more important than Leonardo's specific discoveries, remarkable as they were. Individual facts and inventions could be superseded by later research, but the approach to inquiry that Leonardo had developed would remain valid, as long as human beings sought to understand the natural world. His conviction that direct observation was more reliable than traditional authority, that mathematical analysis could reveal hidden patterns in natural phenomena, that systematic experimentation could test theoretical hypotheses. These insights would eventually transform not only natural philosophy, but every field of human learning. Yet Leonardo's influence extended beyond methodology to encompass a broader vision of human potential and responsibility. His notebooks reveal someone who believed deeply that understanding the natural world was not an abstract intellectual exercise, but a practical endeavor that could improve human life and expand human capabilities. His engineering projects were designed to solve real problems: how to provide clean water to cities, how to build structures that would resist earthquake damage, how to create machines that would reduce the burden of human labor.
His medical investigations were motivated by the hope that better understanding of bodily functions would lead to more effective treatments for disease and injury. This integration of theoretical investigation with practical application reflected Leonardo's conviction that knowledge was valuable, not for its own sake, but for its ability to serve human needs and aspirations. He saw no fundamental distinction between pure and applied science, between artistic creation and technological innovation. All were aspects of the same fundamental human drive to understand and improve the world, to transform the raw materials of experience into forms that were more beautiful, more useful, more comprehensible than their natural states. The artistic works that Leonardo left behind embodied this same integration of knowledge and creation. Paintings like the Mona Lisa and the Last Supper were not merely decorative objects, but investigations into the nature of human consciousness and emotion, explorations of the ways in which inner life expresses itself through external appearance. His unfinished works, including the mysterious Saint John the Baptist and the enigmatic Leda and the Swan, pushed the boundaries of what painting could achieve, creating images that seemed to exist at the intersection of the real and the ideal, the observed and the imagined. These paintings demonstrated that art, at its highest level, was not separate from science but complementary to it. Where scientific investigation revealed the mechanical principles underlying natural phenomena, artistic creation explored their aesthetic and emotional dimensions. Where anatomy explained the structure and function of the human body, painting could capture the subtle ways in which soul expressed itself through flesh. Where engineering designed machines to extend human capabilities, art created experiences that enriched human consciousness and sensibility. The synthesis of art and science that Leonardo achieved was made possible by his fundamental conviction that beauty and truth were intimately related, perhaps even identical in their deepest essence. He believed that the same mathematical principles that governed the motion of planets and the flow of water also determined the proportions that human beings found most pleasing in art and architecture. The same careful observation that revealed the structure of flowers and the anatomy of birds could also guide the artist in creating images of unprecedented beauty and emotional power. This conviction that aesthetic and scientific truth were aspects of the same underlying reality gave Leonardo's work a unity and coherence that distinguished it from the productions of more specialized thinkers. His paintings were informed by his scientific knowledge, while his scientific investigations were guided by his artistic sensibility. The result was a body of work that was both more beautiful and more truthful than what could have been achieved through either approach alone. The immediate impact of Leonardo's death on the intellectual life of Europe was limited by the fact that most of his discoveries remained unpublished and unknown to the broader scholarly community. The notebooks that contained his most important insights were written in his personal mirror script, making them difficult for others to read even when they had access to them. Francesco Melzi, though devoted to his master's memory, lacked the knowledge and connections necessary to prepare Leonardo's scattered observations for publication. As a result, many of Leonardo's most significant discoveries would not be widely known until centuries after his death. Yet even in his own lifetime, Leonardo's reputation as an extraordinary figure had spread throughout educated Europe. Visitors to the courts where he worked carried reports of his remarkable achievements back to their own countries, inspiring others to pursue similar investigations. His artistic innovations, embodied in paintings that could be viewed and studied, had immediate influence on his contemporaries and successors. The techniques he developed for representing light and shadow, for creating the illusion of three-dimensional space on flat surfaces, for capturing psychological depth in portraiture, were quickly adopted and refined by other artists. More importantly, Leonardo's example demonstrated that it was possible for a single individual to make significant contributions across multiple fields of knowledge. His career showed that the artificial boundaries between art and science, theory and practice, observation and creation, need not limit human inquiry and achievement. This example inspired a generation of Renaissance thinkers who sought to emulate his integration of diverse forms of learning and investigation. The broader cultural impact of Leonardo's work became apparent only gradually, as his notebooks were slowly deciphered and his innovations were rediscovered by later investigators. When his anatomical drawings were finally published in the 18th century, they revolutionized medical education and research. When his engineering designs were studied in the 19th century, they provided inspiration for inventors working on similar problems. When his optical theories were understood in the 20th century, they were recognized as anticipating fundamental discoveries about the nature of light and vision. But perhaps Leonardo's most important legacy was less tangible than any specific discovery or invention. He demonstrated through his own example that human beings were capable of understanding and controlling natural forces in ways that previous generations had thought impossible. His flying machines, though never successfully built in his lifetime, proved that human flight was theoretically possible and provided a roadmap for others to follow. His anatomical investigations showed that the human body could be understood as a mechanical system whose functions could be analyzed and perhaps improved through scientific knowledge. This expansion of human possibility, this demonstration that the boundaries of the achievable were far broader than most people imagined, may have been Leonardo's greatest contribution to human civilization. By showing that careful observation and systematic thinking could unlock the secrets of nature, he helped establish the foundations of the modern scientific worldview. By proving that art and science could be integrated into a single comprehensive approach to understanding, he provided a model for the kind of synthetic thinking that would be necessary to address the complex challenges facing human civilization. The peaceful gardens of Clos-Lucé, where Leonardo spent his final years, seemed to embody the harmony between human art and natural beauty that had inspired his entire career. Here, surrounded by carefully tended landscapes that demonstrated humanity's ability to work with natural forces rather than against them, he had been able to pursue his investigations with the kind of sustained focus and systematic approach that his earlier, more turbulent circumstances had rarely permitted. The mechanical devices and artistic works that filled his final workshop bore witness to a lifetime devoted to understanding and celebrating the intricate relationships that connected all aspects of the natural world. As the seasons turned and the Loire Valley settled into the rhythms that had sustained it for countless generations before Leonardo's arrival, and would continue long after his departure, the influence of his work began its slow but inexorable spread through the networks of learning and creation that connected the intellectual centers of Europe. Students and scholars who had encountered his ideas would carry them to distant universities and workshops, where they would inspire new investigations and discoveries. Artists who had studied his techniques would develop them in directions he had never imagined. Engineers who learned of his mechanical innovations would apply them to problems he had never considered. The great conversation of human learning, to which Leonardo had contributed so many profound insights and elegant solutions, would continue without his direct participation. But the methods he had developed, the questions he had posed, the connections he had revealed between seemingly disparate phenomena, would remain as permanent additions to humanity's intellectual resources. In demonstrating that the natural world was comprehensible through careful observation and systematic analysis, that human creativity could work with natural forces to produce results of unprecedented beauty and utility, that the boundaries between art and science were artificial barriers rather than fundamental divisions, Leonardo had opened new possibilities for human understanding and achievement that would continue to unfold for generations to come. And now, as you lie here, letting your own thoughts drift and settle, allow the legacy of his restless curiosity to become a gentle lullaby. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and rest in the knowledge that just as Leonardo's light carried forward into the future, so too does your own quiet journey continue into tomorrow. Good night, and sleep well.